What's up, YouTubers? So I have a treat for you guys today, and no, it's not birthday cake or anything, so settle down. What I got is weld testing. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I came up with a harebrained idea that may or may not work. We're going to find out, but we're going to test welds today. So without anything further said, let's get into it. So to start things off, I'm a little bit zoomed in here, so hopefully you can see. I have 4 fillet welds that are basically 3/8 plate, all welded with wire processes. So the 2 on the left were done with gas shielded short arc MIG, and the 2 on the right were done with flux core self-shielded wire. Now, a couple things straight away. One, because I had to weld these on my generator, I was limited to about 180 amps of output. 180 amps of output is nowhere near the ballpark of what you would need to weld 3/8 plate. So just to get that out of the way, that is going to, I guess, give us reduced performance in what could be expected welding on 3/8 plate. Now, number 2 is short arc MIG is not really capable of welding 3/8 plate on a closed root fillet weld like this and get virtually no penetration is going to be expected. And I've already proven that in my previous videos. Now, if you have a 240 amp MIG welder and you crank that up and you're still, running C25 gas where you're still short arc MIG in it, you may get better penetration than me, but honestly, short arc MIG is not a pre-qualified procedure on this thick a plate in this position, and I would not recommend it. Now, the interesting thing is that flux core wire self-shielded can technically weld 3/8 plate with a 200 amp MIG welder. However, there's a lot of undesirable side effects. It may be a little bit hard for you to see, but there's evidence of porosity here on the toe line. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I tried a lot of different things on this 3/8 plate. These are just the 2, not really better ones, but I was experimenting trying to get flux core wire to do a fillet weld on 3/8 plate. And I had a lot of issues with porosity and all of that. And I tried switching wires. I tried massively different settings. I've contacted a couple wire vendors and looked at their info for what they claim for the wire, and what I found is most of the flux core wire literally say that the maximum thickness that they should be welded on, so this is for self-shielded flux core, is just under 3/8 plate. And I think the reason is that, and this is with 035 wire, keep in mind, this was 035 hard wire, this was 035 flux core. And I think the issue is that 035 flux core cannot handle enough amperage, because remember, it's a hollow thin-walled tube, enough amperage to carry enough heat on this thick a plate. And when you crank it up, you basically melt the wire off in an undesirable fashion before it even hits where it should. And long story short, you have issues with porosity and whatnot. And had I been able to step up to 045 flux core wire, I think that would have, at 200 amps, would have been no issue, or even 180 amps would have been no real issue with this thick a plate. But I don't have the wire for that. I don't have the drive roller for that, nor do you probably have that, because most home hobbyist MIG welders don't have 045 drive rolls, it may be even available for them. So it's just something to think of. So what this comparison really is going to be is what you can expect for short arc MIG at about 180 amps, maybe a little bit more, and running flux core self-shielded, which on this thick a plate you will see weld defects. And what we're going to do, we're going to bend test these and compare the strength. Now, this is more or less a mechanical comparison. We're not really going to be doing tensile strength testing, because I'm going to bend these towards the face where we're going to leverage against the weld. And what this is hopefully going to show is that if you have more penetration on a root, you actually will produce a stronger weld. Now, whether or not we're going to see that, I don't know, because these welds have defects, and how much that's going to affect the strength, Again, I don't know, but based on my past testing, flux core wire on this has more penetration, and I believe that we're going to get higher strength bending this than with the short arc MIG, but we won't know unless we test it, and that's the purpose of this video. So let me show you how I'm going to test it, and then let's just get to breaking these and look at the data. So here's a completely janky test setup. What I did is I welded a socket extension on a big, thick, heavy plate, reinforced it up here just really for more bite, and then I have a digital torque adapter to a breaker bar. Now this setup isn't perfect, okay? First off, I'm measuring torque from this point, not from up here. So this has no bearing on any accuracy for like how many foot-pounds it actually took to break, because our pivot point, our leverages, everything's off. But what this will do, hopefully, is give us consistent readings. As long as I test from the same point, we can compare the numbers and we can determine if these two are stronger than these two. And that's the whole point of it, is that I can tell you, if I hook a breaker bar up to this, I can tell you my feeling on which one takes more force, but I want to bring you guys along so you can see actual hard numbers as to the difference in strength. So that's kind of the point of this. Now, this is version 1. I sprayed painted it with some impact rated black, so I know it's not going to break, but I probably will change this around in the future. I'm not really positive. The offset on this kind of leverages this to the side, which I figured it would, but you know, it is what it is for right now. Hopefully this works. Now, one other thing I want to mention before we get going here, and that is that these short arc MIG welds are actually physically larger than the flux core welds, and you probably noticed that when in the previous part of this video, where just visually they're smaller. So it's going to be an interesting contrast, because more weld generally means stronger in this test, but again, that root fusion is going to play a huge role in how much force it actually takes. Now, long story short, I'm going to turn this on, I'll let it calibrate itself. I'm going to bend it, and this will give a reading of the max it takes. In the event that I max out this unit, so it takes more force than 250 foot-pounds at this point to break or bend these, I'm just going to call it basically a pass, okay? Now, the issue with that is that, well, I really should have got a second one of these that are bigger to where I could actually go up higher in torque, and maybe I will, but I don't have any expectations. I have no idea how much force these are going to take to break. So that's the point of doing this testing. So without anything more said, let's break them. All right, we're at 0. Here goes nothing. And we have a failure at 96.8. I don't know if you can see that. Let me clear this off. Keep in mind, these are peak numbers, so ultimately it probably hit that 90-something number and then immediately dropped down to like 20, because I can tell you there was virtually no force that it took to bend that. Let's try this one. That one is 89.1. Hopefully you can see that. So a little bit of discrepancy already, to be expected. Now, I know you're probably telling yourself that, well, a single pass weld isn't going to be very strong on this plate, and you're absolutely right, it's not going to. 3/8 plate with this short arc MIG with 035 wire really should probably get 3 passes with short arc. So it's under our passes are underfilled. But again, we're looking at the strength difference between the flux core wire and short arc. So now we have the flux core weld, the first one. Let's break this. Okay, 80 foot-pounds, so a little bit weaker. Not what I expected, but it is what it is. And the last one, $77. Alrighty. Well, let's bring these down to the table and look at them. So those results were a little bit interesting and I guess not what I expected. We saw that the flux core welds actually broke at less torque or less foot-pounds, so less force than the short arc MIG. I think, at least in theory, we're going to see more penetration on the flux core welds, but I believe that the result of this being weaker had more to do with the weld size on this than it did the process itself, I guess, is the best way I could describe it. Because these welds were smaller than this, the leverage effect played a bigger role to help this than likely the higher penetration for this. So what I'm going to do is finish breaking these, and we're just going to look inside and determine what's really going on. So let's look at what we got here. I will compare and contrast. Let's do these two, I guess. We can learn a lot from what we see here, and what I'll do is I'm going to reverse this and I will zoom in so we're all on the same page. So we have the short arc MIG weld here and we have the flux core wire weld here. Right away, this gray metal, that's our weld metal. The weld failed for the most part. It was not the plate. Most of it is the weld itself, which is what you want. If your weld peels off the plate, you got issues. So that's a good sign. When you look at how clean the short arc MIG break is, how it's consistent in gray color, and then you start looking at this and you see shiny silver spots, you see dark spots. When I'm looking at this in person, I see evidence of very small pores or porosity in this flux core wire weld, which, judging by the surface of it, I figured we would see some in here. We do not see any here. That's a very good indication that our flux core wire, well, that we had issues with it. And like I had said earlier in the video, this flux core wire and all of them that I have either don't say max thickness or they say some oddball size that's under 3/8. Okay, so none of them that I had is rated technically for 3/8 plate. So I think we're seeing defects that just go along with welding on this thick a plate, which had I been running more amperage with a bigger wire, that could have safely welded this. But that's a very good bit of information if you're ever faced with welding very thick metal like this with flux core wire. Everything that I did, I mean, I'm telling you guys, I did a ton of testing. I could not dial out the occasional piece of porosity with it, which that's been my experience with Flux Core 035 across the board for all the years I've been using it, is that really it works great on 1/4 inch and thinner, and you're going to occasionally get porosity with it. So contrasting these, back to what we're talking about, cleaner internal weld structure. Now, penetration-wise, and I'll bring this up here, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see, so you'll have to just trust me on some of this. If you look at how much of a distance from here to this is, you see how wide that is, where the weld is? This had virtually no penetration past the root, and it basically broke right at the root. When you look at this flux core weld, you see the distance between here and here, how it's much thinner than here? That's because this wire penetrated into the root, chewed away at it, and fused it, and then breaking it, it broke further into the plate than here. So here it's less. We can see evidence of the original edge of the plate. So less penetration here, but the overall weld, I mean, 80% of it here had more penetration than on this. And that also is the same when we look at these. Let me break this one the rest of the way. These are the other two welds. Same thing. See how clean? Let me focus this a little better for you. Sorry about that. See how clean the internal weld structure is, and you see all of these indications of potential porosity or weld defects here. So I like the look of that better, but again, same deal here. We can tell, if you look at how wide this is, almost the whole plate edge is exposed here. Here, it has chewed away quite a bit into there other than at the start. So we, no question, had more penetration with the flux core, which that is the same thing like I saw in the previous video I did on this. But so more penetration. Now, more penetration is better. However, we saw that the test results of this weren't as strong. So let's talk a little bit more about that in the conclusion. All right, so in this small testing, we saw differences, and it's important not to make like concrete assumptions, or we need more data before we really know what the hell we're dealing with here. So with that said, I think we can make a couple at least educated assumptions as far as what went on here. The first one being that, well, this flux core wire weld, both of them with the internal defects, likely lost strength because of those defects. So that played a role in the strength. The second thing that played a role in the strength is the smaller weld size. And it's very difficult for you to see on camera here, but I'm sure earlier in the video when I had them lined up before it broke them, you probably noticed that the MIG weld was bigger. So even though it didn't have root penetration, the bigger weld made up for the deficiency in penetration, I think, and the fact that it's so clean. I mean, you saw it in the video that there's really no evidence of any internal porosity, so that's good. To really dial this in better, we would have to make identical size welds, and I'll be honest with you, that's pretty difficult to do with flux core, because the issue I have is 035 flux core wire, even though it's the same diameter as a MIG wire, it's a hollow tube, so it simply deposits less metal. I would almost have to use 030 MIG wire to produce a smaller weld, and then 035 flux core to make it closer to even, and then that's not really fair to MIG. So this test is very difficult to, how do I put it, make an apples to apples comparison. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But we did learn something, and that is that, well, for one, neither one of these welds are the appropriate size, and guess what? I'm going to do a video where we test the breaking strength of a 3-pass weld versus a single one, since I already have data now, and that's going to really show why you put an appropriate weld size for what you're welding. So that'll be interesting. But again, this really, I guess, shows the importance of using the correct process, correct settings and all of that for what you're welding. And honestly, neither one of these are ideal or what I would use for welding this. I mean, I've welded 1/4-inch plate with flux core. I think that is acceptable, and that's pretty much what I would say is the limit with 035 flux core. If you want acceptable results and low chance of porosity, when you start welding stuff like this, I stick weld it or TIG it. I don't flux core or MIG weld 3/8 plate. That's me. And guess what? Another video we're going to do is we're going to look at 3/8 plate, where we're going to test stick welding welds as well. And I think you're going to see on that a huge difference in performance. And that's why stick is still relevant today, especially for us home hobbyists. It gives us the ability to weld very thick plates with good performance. So anyways, with all that said, if you have an opinion on this or have any ideas, feel free to share them. I like to hear them. And I think we can all learn from this, as well as the future tests I'm going to do regarding welds like this. So with that said, thanks for sticking around for the video. Until next time.